The wind in the small town of Blackwood, Maine, always felt like it was trying to whisper a warning. By the time November arrived, the autumn leaves had turned into crisp, dead skeletons shuffling across the asphalt, and the sun dropped behind the pine trees by 4 in the afternoon. For 17-year-old Ethan Vance, that late afternoon darkness was usually just a sign that it was time to head home from soccer practice. But tonight, he wasn't going home. Blackwood was a typical New England town, built on old money, timber miles, and colonial secrets. On the highest ridge overlooking the valley sat the Miller Estate, a sprawling, Victorian-style mansion that had been abandoned since the late 1980s. The local teenagers called it the Ghost House, a cliché placeholder for a place with a genuinely dark history. The story went that Arthur Miller, a wealthy industrialist, had locked himself inside the house after his daughter disappeared in the surrounding woods. He was never seen again, and when the bank finally opened the doors years later, the house was entirely empty, except for a single ornate grandfather clock ticking away in the master bedroom, despite having no battery or winding mechanism. Ethan didn't believe in ghosts. He was a practical kid, a high school junior who spent his time studying for the SATs and fixing up his old Ford pickup truck. But his friend Tyler was different. Tyler was obsessed with urban legends and spent hours on internet forums reading about paranormal encounters. For weeks, Tyler had been pressuring Ethan and their friend Chloe to do a midnight run to the Miller Estate. Tonight, because of a stupid dare made during lunch at the school cafeteria, they were actually doing it. They met at the edge of the woods behind the town library at 11 at night. Chloe was shivering in her North Face jacket, her flashlight beam bouncing nervously against the thick trunks of the pine trees. Tyler looked ecstatic, holding a digital camcorder he'd stolen from his older brother. "We shouldn't be here," Chloe whispered, her breath fogging in the freezing air. "The police patrol the Ridge Road because of the kids who come up here to drink. If we get caught, my mom will ground me until graduation." "Relax, Chloe," Tyler said, adjusting his baseball cap. "The cops only check the main gate. We're taking the old deer trail through the woods. No one's going to see us, right, Ethan?" Ethan sighed, pulling his hood up over his messy brown hair. "Yeah, let's just get this over with." We walk in, Tyler takes his stupid video for his forum friends, and we leave. "I have a chemistry test tomorrow." The hike up the ridge was brutal. The ground was uneven, choked with thick roots and hidden rocks covered by fallen leaves. As they climbed higher, the ambient light from the town below began to fade, swallowed by the dense canopy of trees. The silence of the forest was heavy, broken only by the crunch of their own footsteps. When they finally broke through the tree line, the Miller Estate loomed over them like a giant sleeping beast. Up close, it was terrifyingly grand. The dark wood siding was peeling and warped from decades of harsh Maine winters. The windows were mostly intact, but they were so covered in grime and dust that they looked completely black, reflecting nothing but the void of the night sky. Tyler pointed his camera at the house, the red recording light casting a faint glow on his face. "We are standing outside the infamous Miller Estate. With me are Ethan and Chloe, who are currently questioning every life choice that brought them here." "Turn that thing off, Tyler," Ethan muttered, walking toward the wraparound porch. The wooden steps groaned loudly under his weight, a sound that seemed to echo across the empty yard. The front door was chained shut, but a window to the right of the porch had been broken long ago, covered only by a rotting piece of plywood. Ethan grabbed the edge of the plywood and pulled. With a loud screech of rusted nails, it gave way just enough for a person to squeeze through. He shone his flashlight into the darkness inside. The beam illuminated a grand hallway with warped hardwood floors and peeling floral wallpaper. "I'll go first," Ethan said, wanting to get the night over with. He climbed through the window, his sneakers landing with a soft thud on the dusty floor. The air inside was completely stagnant, smelling of dry rot, damp earth, and something old and metallic. Chloe came next, holding Ethan's hand for balance, followed by Tyler, who was still filming. The interior of the mansion was freezing, colder than the air outside. As they walked down the main hallway, their flashlights revealed the remnants of a life suddenly abandoned. A velvet sofa sat in the living room, its fabric torn and nested by mice. A grand piano stood in the corner, its lid open, the keys covered in a thick layer of dust. "This place gives me the creeps," Chloe said, hugging her arms tightly around herself. "It feels like someone is watching us." "That's just the atmosphere, Chloe," Tyler whispered, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. He pointed his camera toward the grand staircase at the end of the hall. "The master bedroom is on the 3rd floor. That's where the grandfather clock is supposed to be." They climbed the stairs slowly. Every step felt like a betrayal, the old wood crying out in the silence of the house. By the time they reached the 3rd floor, Ethan's heart was beating faster than he cared to admit. The darkness up here felt thicker, almost heavy, as if the shadows themselves had weight. At the end of the long, narrow corridor on the 3rd floor was a massive double door. One of the doors hung slightly off its hinges. Ethan pushed it open, and the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness of the master bedroom. The room was vast. In the center was a massive 4-poster bed, its curtains long since rotted away. And there, against the far wall, stood the grandfather clock. It was beautiful, made of dark mahogany wood with intricate carvings of vines and faces around the edges. But what made all three of them freeze was the sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound was incredibly loud in the dead silence of the house. The golden pendulum inside the glass case was swinging back and forth with perfect precision. Tyler gasped, moving closer with his camera. "Oh man, it's real. Look at the pendulum. There's no way this thing should be working." Ethan walked up to the clock, feeling a strange sensation of vertigo. The air around the clock felt vibrating, like a low-voltage electrical current was running through the room. He shone his light directly at the clock face. The hands were pointing to 11:45. "Let's just get the video and go," Chloe pleaded from the doorway. "Please, Tyler, we saw it. Now let's leave." Suddenly, the ticking stopped. The pendulum froze dead in the center. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Clack. The minute hand of the clock jumped forward. It didn't move smoothly. It snapped instantly to the 12. It was midnight. Before anyone could speak, a deep, resonant chime echoed from the clock. But it wasn't a normal bell. It sounded warped, like a human scream slowed down and amplified through metal. Bong. With the first chime, the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath turned into thick white clouds. Bong. With the second chime, the flashlights in Ethan and Chloe's hands began to flicker wildly. Tyler's camera screen glitched, static lines cutting through the digital image. "Guys." Tyler's voice was trembling now. "My camera. The battery was full, but it's dying." Bong. The third chime sounded closer, as if it wasn't coming from the clock anymore, but from inside their own heads. Suddenly, a loud, violent crash echoed from the 1st floor, the sound of the plywood window being slammed shut, followed by the heavy thud of the front doors locking. "Someone's downstairs!" Chloe shrieked, panic entirely taking over her voice. "Run!" Ethan shouted. They bolted out of the bedroom and sprinted down the narrow corridor. The darkness seemed to have grown deeper, the beam of Ethan's flickering flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. They reached the grand staircase and began flying down the steps, their footsteps sounding like gunfire in the empty house. As they reached the 2nd floor landing, Ethan looked down into the main hallway. His heart dropped into his stomach. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, directly in front of the exit, was a figure. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its limbs were impossibly thin and elongated. It wore a tattered dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. But it was the face that made Ethan freeze. It had no eyes, no nose, no hair. There was only a wide, jagged mouth filled with rows of needle-like teeth, stretched into a horrific, unnatural smile. The creature's head snapped upward, its blank face locking onto them despite having no eyes. It let out a sound that shook the floorboards, a high-pitched mechanical screech that sounded exactly like the chime of the grandfather clock. "Up! Go back up!" Tyler screamed, his camera dropping from his hands and shattering on the floor. They turned and scrambled back up the stairs, desperation lending them unnatural speed. They didn't stop until they reached the third floor again, slamming the heavy double doors of the master bedroom shut behind them. Ethan frantically looked for a lock, but there was none. He grabbed a heavy wooden chair sitting near the vanity and wedged it under the door handle. Chloe was sobbing hysterically in the corner of the room, her knees pulled to her chest. Tyler was hyperventilating, leaning against the four-poster bed. What was that? What the hell was that? Tyler cried, his hands shaking violently. "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice tight. His flashlight was completely dead now. The only light in the room came from the pale moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. He walked over to the window and tried to push it open, but it was painted shut. He grabbed a heavy glass perfume bottle from the vanity and smashed it against the glass. The pane shattered, sending shards falling to the roof below. "We can climb out onto the porch roof," Ethan said, turning back to his friends. "It's a drop, but we'll survive." Before either of them could move, a heavy thud shook the double doors. Boom! The wooden chair wedged under the handle groaned. Boom! A long, pale, multi-jointed finger poked through the gap between the doors, followed by another. The wood began to splinter under an impossible amount of strength. "Chloe, Tyler, get out the window now!" Ethan yelled. Tyler scrambled through the broken frame first, dropping out of sight onto the sloped roof below. Chloe followed, her hands bleeding slightly from the residual glass on the frame, but she didn't care. She disappeared into the night. Ethan turned to follow them, but as he reached the window, the double doors exploded inward. The heavy wooden chair shattered into splinters. The creature stepped into the room. In the moonlight, its skin looked like wet paper, translucent and gray. It didn't walk, it glided across the floor with terrifying speed. Ethan scrambled out of the window, his sneakers slipping on the icy shingles of the porch roof. He looked down and saw Tyler and Chloe already on the ground, shouting for him to jump. He slid down the roof, but before he could reach the edge, a cold, slimy grip clamped around his ankle. Ethan screamed as he was jerked backward. He looked up and saw the creature leaning out of the window. Its elongated arms stretched down the roof with impossible length. The needle-like teeth were inches from his face, and the smell of rot coming from its open mouth was overwhelming. Using all his strength, Ethan swung his free leg and kicked the creature's face with his heavy boot. The impact felt like hitting solid concrete, but it was enough to make the monster hesitate. The grip on his ankle loosened just enough. Ethan pulled himself free and threw himself off the edge of the roof. He fell 10 feet, landing hard in the dead leaves and dirt below. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder, but the adrenaline masked the worst of it. Tyler and Chloe grabbed him by his jacket, pulling him to his feet. "Run! Don't look back!" Tyler yelled. They sprinted into the woods, crashing through the brush and ignoring the branches that scratched their faces. Behind them, from the roof of the Miller estate, a terrifying metallic screech echoed through the valley, a sound that chased them all the way down the ridge until they reached the safety of Ethan's truck. They piled inside, and Ethan slammed his foot on the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel road as they sped away from the ridge. Nobody spoke for the entire drive back to town. They dropped Chloe off at her house, then Tyler, and finally Ethan parked in his own driveway. He sat in the cab of his truck for a long time, watching the dark tree line behind his house. The next day, Ethan, Tyler, and Chloe met at school, but they didn't talk about the night before. They didn't need to. The unspoken agreement was clear. They would never speak of the Miller estate again. A week later, Ethan was in his bedroom, studying late for a history exam. The house was completely quiet, his parents having gone to sleep hours ago. He looked at his phone. It was 11:58 p.m. He decided to pack his books and go to bed. As he reached for the light switch, he froze. From the hallway outside his bedroom door, he heard a sound. It was faint but unmistakable. Tick-tock, tick-tock. His house didn't have a grandfather clock. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat as the ticking stopped. The digital clock on his nightstand flipped to 12 a.m. And then from just outside his bedroom door, a deep, mechanical chime echoed through the silent house, followed by the sound of something long and heavy dragging itself across the floorboards toward his room.